good, everybody? Welcome in week 4 of FSM Football Sunday live, coming to you on Facebook Live, on YouTube Live, on Periscope, wherever you might be live, we're live with you. My name is Ben Heisler. I'm the Director of Media Operations for Fantasy Sports Markets, and with me, one of the best fantasy analysts in the country. You can follow him on Twitter at Fensty Sports. You can hear him on SiriusXM Fantasy Sports Radio Saturday mornings at 6 a.m. Eastern Time for Wake Up Fantasy Sports, and he's also the outstanding insider over at FantasyAlarm.com. What's up, Fensty? Happy week 4 to you, buddy.
Happy week 4, Ben. The object of this week, refuse to lose. A lot of 0-3 players out there. That ends today when you listen to us.
I'm right there with you. We will get to some of the biggest injury news and notes before we go through some of our favorite plays. We'll break down the matchups for you. And of course, I am looking at it right now, right at the bottom of the screen. You see where it says send us your lineup questions? It's what we're here for, guys. This is the most interactive fantasy football show out there. We want to hear from you. If you have questions about your lineup today, both in season long or your daily lineups on Fantasy Sports Markets, we're here to help you out. We'll go through our favorite plays and break those matchups down as well. But before we do that, for those of you guys that are new to the show, first of all, welcome. Second of all, I'm going to put this on the screen. Promo code Homer. This is actually incorrect. It says $5 on the screen. Fensty, that is not actually the case. As I work in the process, live streaming television, here we go. Promo code Homer will get you $10 over at FantasySportsMarkets.com. But here's the caveat. This goes away after today. September 30th is its expiration date. So promo code Homer, $10 over at FantasySportsMarkets.com. That is a free entry into our $10 to bomb contest where first place walks away with, I believe, $150 today and a chance for $50,000 in a perfect roster bonus. So promo code Homer, get over to FantasySportsMarkets.com and check us out today. All right, Fensty, before the questions start to come in, let's dive into a couple of the injury news and notes heading in. Now, a lot of this will be released at around 10:30 Central Time today before kickoff. But notably, anything standing out to you as we look through the injuries today?
Yes, a lot of the guys, Ben, that were questionable are actually going to play today. Leonard Fournette will play today, it's looking like. It's expected to play, the report right now. Dion, you can stop me wherever you want, Ben. DeAndre Hopkins also dealing with multiple injuries, expected to play. Same with Rob Gronkowski. Same with Keenan Allen. And here's one, Ben, that we're going to have to talk about. Maybe one of the hardest players to start or sit this week. Larry Fitzgerald expected to play for the Cardinals today. So that's something that we're going to have to decide on. Same with LaShawn McCoy. Also very hard. We want to bench him. We haven't seen the explosiveness from him when he's in, but will he still get the volume of touches even with Josh Allen, or will Allen do what we saw him do against Minnesota and act as more of a vulture? That's something that we're going to have to talk about.
Do you think that's something that's theoretically impossible, that Allen can repeat that type of performance? Because that was incredible what we saw last week.
Right. Maybe was given a little bit of a longer leash to do that because of the lack of LaShawn McCoy. But even with McCoy in there, we're not seeing that explosiveness from him. So I don't think it's impossible that he has doesn't have another game like that. I see him rushing in another touchdown. You see with Adrian Peterson, veteran running backs, you saw Adrian Peterson still have the ability last week to be able to run over guys. But LaShawn McCoy's not like that. He'll get you 3 yards here, 3 yards there. That explosiveness factor from Shady is gone. We're in the aftermath portion, Ben.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Fensty, before we get to some of our questions, there is a game that I think you and I are in total agreement on when it comes to exposure today. And that is the Bengals going on the road to Atlanta. This is one of the higher totals of the week. It started at 48. It has gone all the way up to 52. There's so much goodness here. And I think a lot of people are looking at Calvin Ridley. And I almost worry about this because Ridley's game last week, and granted the targets are going up, the red zone looks are very clear. But I'm starting to think people might be overlooking somebody like Julio Jones, despite the fact that he's still getting plenty of targets, despite the fact that he's still getting opportunities. They just see the lack of touchdowns, but they see him for Ridley. They see the big plays, and they haven't seen as much for Julio. Do you think people should be worried about Julio at this point? And do you think maybe the love for Ridley is getting a little bit too much?
The love for Ridley this week is going to be a little too much. That's why, Ben, in a few of my lineups, I've pivoted and gone with Mohamed Sanu. Remember,
interesting. Okay.
Sanu scored a touchdown also on 7 targets. So if you look at his 3 weeks thus far, he's had 2 games where one he had 6, one he had 7. He had in week 2 only 2 targets there. But if you're that concerned about ownership when it comes to Ridley and that exposure, but you still want a piece of this game, that's where you pivot off to Sanu. Now, you asked me about Julio. I'm perfectly fine with Julio. You're going, and especially with non-salary, you want the best in this matchup.
No doubt.
And that's where Julio comes in. But for those that are not facing that situation, want to be different, Sanu is not a bad play today, Ben.
Yeah, Sanu is perfectly fine. We mentioned Julio. I'm looking at the running backs in this game with a ton of interest. There was a great stat that was compiled, I think it was by Josh Cole on Roto Grinders. He was talking about how in the course of the NFL, right, there have only been 6 running backs in NFL history that have finished with 15 or more catches in an NFL game. 2 of them have come in the last 2 weeks against the Falcons. Christian McCaffrey, and last week it was Alvin Kamara. Now, Gio Bernard is a really good pass-catching running back. Not to the level of those 2 guys, I don't think, but I think he's still very much in the conversation. And if you're looking at just pure opportunities, Atlanta funnels a lot of their targets into the middle of the field. And I think Gio Bernard is in an absolute smash spot today and probably my favorite Bengal on the board.
9 targets last week. You got to love that going in with no Joe Mixon. And a lot of people, Ben, this is something we're going to have to talk about. I feel like Tyler Boyd is everybody's darling this week. So if you want someone else, I think Tyler Boyd is getting touted more this week, Ben. You could disagree with me if you want, than Gio Bernard. But like you said, Gio Bernard against one of the worst rush defenses in the league, and especially against running backs. But the targets he's been getting, 9 targets last week, 7 the week before, that's amazing.
Yeah, I'm with you there. What do you think of somebody like Tevin Coleman, who also is in a really good opportunity against the Bengals? I don't know if it's necessarily the same projected volume as, say, Gio Bernard, but Coleman, especially with no Devontae Freeman, he once again is out this week. I think he practiced at the end of the week, but all reports are that Devontae Freeman will not play this week. Right. Somebody like Tevin Coleman, I think, especially if you're expecting this game to be a shootout, plenty of pass-catching opportunities, and remember, at Fantasy Sports Markets, it's full-point PPR. Those points add up very quickly.
Was a little bit disappointed in his performance against New Orleans. I thought he would have like a Gio-like performance last week. But still, Tevin Coleman in a good spot because, again, you want exposure to this matchup. And for those that are entering certain tournaments where you want to try to be a little bit different, I think Tevin Coleman, I'm not going to say he's under the radar because, Ben, everybody's seen this high Vegas total thus far. So Tevin Coleman, I do think, is in a very good spot. A lot more people will be on Gio Bernard than Coleman, but still Coleman, I like him to produce today. Also, if you think about it like this from the athlete standpoint, with Freeman out right now, this is Coleman's opportunity. This is his audition that once Freeman comes back in, how much Coleman will we see? That'll be contingent a lot, I guess, on today's performance.
No doubt about it. It appears that we're having a little bit of issues with our Facebook live streams. For those of you guys that are watching on Periscope, thank you guys for being a part of it. Remember, you can send in your questions, and we will take them right here on the show. Looks like PD Dubs comes in with a question. He says, my question is, would you play Doug Baldwin today? And if so, who would you play him over? I mean, that's a little bit tough, PD, because, I still think Baldwin, even if he comes back today, I know the matchup is intriguing against Arizona, and he likes to play out of the slot, so he gets to avoid somebody like Patrick Peterson, right? But I mean, it's hard to answer that question unless we know, who else you're looking at. I would avoid him completely in daily, even if it's the biggest tournament possible on Fantasy Sports Markets. There's just so many other wide receiver plays that I think you don't have to worry about Baldwin until you know that he's 100%.
Well, Seattle Times actually came out recently and said that it's not looking like he is 100% for this game, so take that as it will. So, Ben, if you're taking this open-ended question here and you're deciding, Doug Baldwin's there, would you start him over Tyler Lockett? I wouldn't. I'm still going Tyler Lockett there.
I'm with you there. I think it doesn't make sense at this point to even consider Lockett. Not Baldwin, because you need to see more. And remember, he started the season, Fensty, saying that he's coming into the season at only 75 to 80%. Now, Baldwin's a guy down the stretch of the season, if he's trying to make plays, if Seattle ends up finding themselves in a more competitive spot than maybe we anticipate, then I'm fully on board with giving Baldwin a go in your season-long lineups. But for daily, it just doesn't make sense when you know that there are other guys that are getting more targets, that you've seen consistently, that are finding the end zone. We just don't know what to expect from Baldwin at this point.
Right, and also I think they're going to put a little bit more into their run game as well. I mean, we saw what Rashad Penny can do, but Chris Carson actually is expected to play. So because of that, I'm thinking they're going to put a little bit more into their run game today against Arizona, meaning that with Baldwin, let's just be spectators this week.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Quick thought on Chris Carson. Do you anticipate listen, he had 10 carries in the first week, 6 carries in week 2, ended up with 30 plus in week 3. Listen, when Seattle is in control, and obviously when they're playing at home, they tend to play better. It was a very encouraging sign for Chris Carson owners to see that the volume was there, and for the fact that they also got, a win out of it as well. So do you look at somebody like Chris Carson saying, okay, when Seattle is effective, they're using him in the running game to help keep Russell Wilson upright. Do you think that they'll go back to him with similar type of volume in week 4?
I'm trying to do some quick math here on the snap counts, and it's looking like if I had to put a percentage on it, it's maybe over or close to 80% of snaps that he was in last week, and just that alone is a gold star that I'm willing to trust him today.
Okay, yeah, Chris Carson is if we're looking that up. And again, Arizona on the road, they were fairly effective against Jordan Howard last week against the Chicago Bears, and that was the time where the Bears were sort of in this sort of unique situation of trying to play from behind against a team that they were better at. Yeah, Chris Carson had 50 out of 69 snaps last week, 32 attempts for 102 yards and a touchdown. Before that, it was a combined 44 snaps. So when Seattle is in the lead, when they feel like they want to dominate time of possession, they're going to go with Carson. They really don't trust Penny at this point. So I think at some point that's going to come to fruition. From Commissioner Marty, he wants to know if there's any new news on Golden Tate for today. Have you seen or heard anything out of the lake?
No, and I'm waiting with bated breath because, Ben, I own Golden Tate in a lot of leagues, so it's very, very tough, and I'm sure a lot of people, especially in daily, that if Golden Tate is out, it's going to be all systems a go for Kenny Golladay. It should be anyway because he has been getting a lot of targets, but still, I have not seen any new news on Golden Tate with that hip.
All right, we'll continue to keep you posted, Commish Marty, if we end up hearing anything. PD's right back in. He says he's taking the wait-and-see approach. He's going to start Tyler Boyd and Marvin Jones Jr. over Baldwin. Yeah, that's absolutely the right move at this point.
For sure.
Let's go to another game. And listen, is there anything else that we're missing from Cincinnati, Atlanta, other than the fact that I think Tyler Eifert is in another intriguing situation? Finally got the target carry that we expected in week 3 for Tyler Eifert. And he's going to get in the end zone at some point. That's sort of what Tyler Eifert's been known for, is not necessarily a high target volume, but a guy that's always going to be looked at consistently in the red zone. And you're starting to see this progression for Eifert in a really positive direction with some really good matchups coming in, including today against Atlanta. And I think, Eifert is somebody that's in a really nice spot today.
Yes, and with tight ends not being the easiest to figure out today, Gronk, like we said, is looking like he'll play. Tyler Eifert, until he gets hurt again, you can trust him. The same goes with Jordan Reed when he's on the docket. So that's right now how we have to view it with the familiarity there. You asked if there's anything else. Tyler Boyd is someone that a lot of people are going to be focused on, Ben. Tyler Boyd in an excellent matchup now. A.J. Green is healthy, but still you can look at it one of two ways, that now A.J. Green being out there a full game, unless he gets hurt again, will draw that top coverage, and Tyler Boyd should be able to take advantage. I'm having Boyd in a lot of my daily lineups this week.
Yeah, I love Boyd. I recommended him over Ridley just because I thought that the volume was going to be a little bit more consistent throughout the year, especially this week with Dalton constantly throwing. Dalton, I think, is a cash game lock.
Yes.
I think on fantasy sports markets where you don't have to worry about salary, you don't necessarily need to include him, but I think he's got a great matchup. But I think because of the fact that he's going to have to throw, Bernard is better in the passing game as opposed to in the running game, but he got 100% of the snaps, Fensty, last week. So
they need him. They need him.
He's in a great spot. And then there's so many weapons around him. Like I think we all tend to maybe overlook the ability of Cincinnati's offense to really exploit a lot of matchups. And that's why I think even on the road against Atlanta, and in the fact that Dalton threw 4 interceptions last week, he should be a cash game lock, despite the fact that he threw 4 picks last week.
Yes. Now, if you're asking me in that matchup who I'd rather start between him and Matt Ryan, I'm going to pick Matt Ryan. But still, Ben, I like the way you're thinking, especially the big thing is how he's using Gio in that pass game, and that'll essentially get you more points there. So Gio Bernard not only viewed this week as a running back, but also a receiver with the amount of targets he's been getting.
Let's get to some more questions. This one coming in from our buddy Seth over on Periscope. He has a question about, it looks like a flex play. He says John Brown, Freeman, or Boyd in a standard league. The only Freeman that I can think of is Devontae Freeman, and he's out.
Royce Freeman.
Royce Freeman. Okay,
Royce
there you go. So between John Brown, Royce Freeman, or Tyler Boyd in a standard league. Let me say something really quickly on Freeman, because more than likely I'd probably choose to not go with him. But Brad Evans of Yahoo pointed out something interesting this week. He said the coaching staff from Denver was pissed off at Phillip Lindsay for throwing that punch in a game that they needed him, where pass catching opportunities were there for the taking with them being down. He punches a Ravens player, he's out of the game. He wonders whether or not the Denver coaching staff is going to look to Freeman and give him more of this opportunity to reclaim his job, because they were pissed off and they don't necessarily want to reward that type of behavior. Do you look at somebody like Royce Freeman in this matchup against Kansas City with a chance to really step up?
I do, but Phillip Lindsay still scares me. It's almost like a ghost that's there that you see, and you don't. And that's because now, and also because of what we just said with Tyler Boyd, that you have Tyler Boyd, and I know it's standard. You have Tyler Boyd. John Brown, keep off to the side. It's going to be between Freeman and Tyler Boyd. Because Lindsay's still back there, and maybe a lot of people are expecting them to go to Freeman more, I feel like a safer play is Tyler Boyd.
I'm with you there. Brown is intriguing just because Pittsburgh's defense has gotten gashed this year. And again, in a standard league, we value touchdowns more than receptions, right? So Brown's gotten into the end zone for Baltimore. Royce Freeman is the goal line back for Denver, and maybe he has an opportunity to get some more opportunities if they are, in fact, upset with Phillip Lindsay. But I think you're right. From a safe perspective, Tyler Boyd's also getting into the end zone, too, and he's getting receptions and opportunities. So I'm with you there. I'd lean towards Tyler Boyd, but I think it's a little bit closer than most people anticipate.
And a lot of the writers that I've been looking and waiting for this report to see if Lindsay would get fewer snaps. Normally you can, because these beat writers, they're so intrusive with the way they ask their questions. Ben, you've seen it. You've been in this stuff before. They'll ask the same question 5 different ways. I've seen nothing about Lindsay getting limited. I'm a little bit surprised about that.
Right. I'm with you there, too. Another question coming in from, let's see, from Slip and Slide on YouTube. Wants to go with Emmanuel Sanders or Tevin Coleman in a flex PPR position. Boy, that's tough, because I'm as big of a fan of that matchup for both of them as anybody. Sanders gets the Kansas City Chiefs at home with a quarterback that is constantly feeding him the football. And at the same time, Tevin Coleman with a great matchup for Atlanta in a game that we were previewing at the beginning of this show. Who do you take between Sanders and Coleman?
Man, I feel like with this, I want to be, as much as I want to attack the Chiefs because everybody does, I really think that we have to go with Coleman for this one. I mean, at some point, Demaryius Thomas is going to impede a little bit more. And that today with Coleman, he doesn't have Freeman to do that. And we're thinking that the Falcons are going to be throwing a lot. I'm going to have to go with Coleman, even though it's a very, very difficult decision.
Would you agree that Coleman's probably the safer play? Sanders maybe has a little bit more upside?
Yes, I agree with that.
All right, so there you go. We are both going with Coleman, but if you want a little bit more upside, Slip and Slide 91. Go ahead and play Manny Sanders.
I want to go. We got to watch some football today. I want to use the slip and slide.
There you go. It's starting to get a little bit sticky in Kansas City, so maybe you bust it out one final time. The weather was so good. It was like early 60s or low 60s with a little bit of sunshine, a little bit of wind. It was like perfect football weather.
Man, bring that to the East Coast, Ben, because all we've been seeing is rain. I'm going to have to make an arc soon enough to get around.
Get you 2x2s. From, let's see, Often Timeit. I think I pronounced it correct on Periscope. John Brown. Oh, no, I'm sorry. We already answered that question.
Yes.
Between Brown, Freeman, and Boyd. Okay.
No Brown.
No Brown. Again from Seth. Do you go with Alex Collins, Chris Hogan, or Chris Carson in a half-point PPR?
Wow. This is an interesting one.
Yeah. I think in this particular situation, I think the upside play is Hogan.
Wow.
I do,
now,
because
I got to say this, Ben.
Okay.
Josh Gordon, not only looking like he's going to play today, but also ESPN's, and I'm seeing this Jeff Darlington reporting on ESPN, that he knows the entire playbook as well. So that's very, very intriguing, Ben. I mean, as much as I want to go with Hogan here, because remember, this is it. Edelman's back next game. Patriots. So this is it. We just talked about this with Tevin Coleman being audition time. This is an audition time for Josh Gordon here. So that does scare me off of Hogan a little bit.
I sort of look at it from a very different approach, because I sort of look at Josh Gordon as the ultimate tease, right? That people are starting him. They feel like, oh my God, here comes Josh Gordon, the guy that caught 1,600 plus yards from bums in Cleveland and Brandon Weeden 5 years ago. And then now he's going to come to New England. He's going to get Bill Belichick and Tom Brady. And they don't have any running game because everybody's hurt. And so Josh Gordon's going to light up the sky. And I keep thinking to myself, like, Brady doesn't trust him yet. You know what Brady does trust? He trusts.
Well, that's the thing. If he knows the entire playbook, then how can you not trust him?
Because I think he'd rather go with a guy that he knows he can throw to reliably in Chris Hogan. In fact, if anything, I don't think it necessarily clears up a lot of coverage for Gronk, although I'm going to have Gronk everywhere today because I feel like at just some point, Patriots are mad. Miami has been playing a little bit above their skis. And even though Brady's first read nearly every time is Gronk. But when he sees he's double or triple covered, he's not going to just force it to him constantly, even though a lot of times he can win that matchup. I think, if anything, it clears up coverage for Hogan to exploit Miami, and it's also a revenge game for him. Don't you forget that.
Interesting.
So I think Hogan has the most upside out of all those guys, but I think the safer play...
I would say Carson is the safer play, Ben, because as someone who owns a lot of Alex Collins, I've had to spend claims on Buck Allen. Buck Allen has been such a vulture to Alex Collins. It's not even funny. It's very, very frustrating. And until I see Collins get in full control, I don't know if I can trust him even in the best DFS matchups.
Do you think Buck Allen is the most frustrating player in fantasy right now?
Yes, I would say number two.
Player?
I would say that number two is someone that has been hurt, Larry Fitzgerald. I'd say that's been one of the most frustrating, but definitely Buck Allen, because as someone who went in on Alex Collins a lot as his second running back, yes, I'm frustrated because I'm not getting that much points. And again, I've had to go and pick up Buck Allen because I've waited a few weeks, but now he keeps getting those goal line touches and it's driving me crazy.
I think to myself that with Buck Allen, the reason that he is so frustrating, and I put him over Larry Fitzgerald because I think people bought in on Alex Collins. And there was reason to, right? He was one of the best running backs in the second half of the season. The volume was there. He wasn't used as much in the passing game, but he proved to be very effective. Everybody was waiting for Kenneth Dixon to show up. He never did. And so Collins lived up to those expectations and played well down the stretch. And so I thought to myself, okay, if you're Baltimore, you're trying to hide Joe Flacco. You're not trying to embrace him and showcase him to the world. You're not like you're going to be able to trade him. To me, it just made all the sense in the world that Alex Collins is going to be an effective running back this year. And he's been okay. I don't want to say he hasn't been a scrub.
He hasn't been a dud. He has not been a dud.
Allen's averaging 2 yards a carry. The problem is that they just don't give it to Collins enough because they prefer Buck Allen in pass protection because they're throwing 50 plus times a game.
Right, and that's where you're seeing we're debating putting John Brown in over some wide receiver twos, and Crabtree, someone that we don't really talk about too much as well, getting targeted. But that's the thing; it's just so frustrating because Buck Allen has become a legit fantasy threat, maybe the most threatening fantasy player of the year thus far.
Yeah, and you hate to look at somebody like Buck Allen who's averaging 2 yards as a handcuff. Unfortunately, we've had to go that way. Let's see, Big Mike, I got 5 receiver spots in season long with John Brown, Michael Thomas. I'm assuming it's Michael Thomas. You just left the last name. I can't think of any other Thomases that stand out.
Demaryius.
Maybe Demaryius Thomas. Okay. Kenny Golladay, Cooper Kupp, and Allen Robinson.
Okay.
So
Kupp already played.
Well, Kupp already played. That's true, and he lit it up. So hopefully, Big Mike, you started him. I guess I'm not sure whether you want us to choose all of them. Like I don't know how many wide receivers. Big Mike, if you can clarify your question.
Should we? Let's just try to rank them. How about that?
Okay. I would put Kupp number 1.
Yes. Good job, Ben. Hot take right there.
Okay. So Antonio Brown, monster every week. You got to play him every week.
Yes.
If it's Michael Thomas, he's 1A to Antonio Brown.
Yes.
If it's Demaryius Thomas, you can push him back a little bit. Allen Robinson's got a really nice matchup, and his volume is always going to be safe. So I'd probably put him in this situation after Kupp and Brown, probably next there, wouldn't you?
Right. Now, again, we need to know what Thomas this is because right now, because of what we've seen from Emmanuel Sanders, right now, Demaryius Thomas, I don't want to say he's limited, but he's not really getting those exploding numbers off the page. So we have to kind of keep him in check right now.
Okay. And then there's Golladay, who I love, but it's a tougher matchup on the road at Dallas today.
Right. Now, the one thing is, remember with the Detroit Lions, and this is where you have to look beyond the stats in your fantasy leagues and go on ESPN or Pro Football Reference, and you need to look at targets and how they're being divided, because it's not that hard to look at targets and seeing that the Lions are among the team that's most there if you're looking in the top 30 in targets, because Marvin Jones Jr., he was banged up. He's still getting targeted. Golden Tate banged up today, may play. He's been getting targeted a ton. No. Same with Golladay. Same with Theo Riddick. So they are throwing a lot, Ben.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, I think anybody who was big on the Kerryon Johnson train felt rewarded last week. But again, I just don't know how reliable that's going to be, because Detroit loves to throw the football because that's just a passing-oriented offense. And also,
here's what that makes me think, Ben, and this is where we shift a little bit. Okay. Another hard player to start, because we saw what Kerryon Johnson did. Do you love the Drake, Ben? Do you love the Drake?
I was a big Drake guy coming into this season, and I still believe he's a buy low guy for me. Like, if anything, if somebody offered me Kenyon Drake for Kerryon Johnson, I would take that deal right now, because I still think I think Miami's coaching staff is smart enough to appreciate how good of a back Kenyon Drake is, and they're trying to save him a little bit with Frank Gore. They're going to use him eventually. But I mean, Kenyon Drake has been bad the first 3 games of the season. The volume and the opportunity hasn't been there either.
And he's up against New England. We saw what Kerryon Johnson did. I just want to hit that submit button and put him in a lot of my daily lineups, but he's not that exciting. And when I see it, I'm looking on some of the DFS actually price sites, and I see guys like Lamar Miller, who I think is in an excellent matchup, even Marshawn Lynch. I can't trust the Drake right now.
No, it is a super contrarian play. And you only do that in 2 different options. One, if you think Miami is good enough to hang with New England, that they want to slow down pace and run the ball a bunch. That's the first one. Or the second one is that if New England gets up to a big lead and Miami is going to be dinking and dunking with Drake throughout the entire game. And I think New England puts up a bunch of points, but I think Miami can hang with them for a little bit. I think maybe it's a Kenny Stills deep touchdown type of day. Maybe Jakeem Grant finds himself in the end zone again. Maybe a Mike Gesicki touchdown as well.
I was just about to say.
That's your guy.
Yesterday on the show on Wake Up Fantasy Sports, Ben, I was creating a Dolphins stack. That's something that we never talk about, stacking the Dolphins. What happens, Ben, if I put Ryan Tannehill, Kenny Stills, and Mike Gesicki as a possible stack option? What do you think about that? It's something that's totally different, that if I'm entering single-entry tournaments, that's the kind of stack that can win you your week.
I think so, but you need to make sure. Like, here's what I would do. And again, there's a lot of questions coming in. We will get to that after this Miami Dolphins stack theoretical question that Fensty has posed, because I think it's really interesting. If I'm going to do a Dolphin stack, then I think I need to make it not a complete game stack, but I need exposure on both sides here, right?
Understood.
Because here's what I'd probably do. If you want Tannehill over Brady, I wouldn't do that on fantasy sports markets. I get it on some of the salary sites.
Right.
I'd go Tannehill, Stills, Gesicki. Those are the guys that are most likely to get in the end zone. Maybe Amendola if you wanted a revenge game type factor, but you gotta put Gronk on the other side. Gronk needs to be in your lineup as a flex if you're gonna put Gesicki in the tight end spot. And then I think you roll the dice with either a Gordon or a Hogan or maybe even a James White.
Right.
Sonny Michel's going to be really popular today. And I think James White is sort of that Rodney Dangerfield type character where he gets blatantly disrespected, and all he does is put up really good numbers every week. So I think if you're going to run a Dolphin stack, you got to have some Patriots on the other side.
Understood, Ben. It's with Gesicki, with AJ Derby being out, we should be seeing a lot more of Gesicki, and nobody is on him today.
Absolutely. This is from Corey on YouTube Live. He says, with Golden Tate added to the injury report, do I roll him out over Doug Baldwin, Demaryius Thomas, Nelson Aguilar, and Mike Williams? It's a 5-point PPR. Also, what are your thoughts on Doug Baldwin moving forward? I think if Tate says he's going to play, because of the volume, you got to include him. We're avoiding Doug Baldwin today,
yes.
Even if he's able to play. Demaryius is in an intriguing matchup. Nelson Aguilar is as well. Mike Williams always has a big touchdown upside, but the target share isn't going to be necessarily there. So between Baldwin, Demaryius, Aguilar, and Williams, do you like any of those guys enough to outseat Golden Tate?
Not if Golden Tate plays. If Golden Tate plays, you keep Golden Tate in there. If not, you're going to go Demaryius Thomas, as we talked about at the top of our show here, Ben. That it's looking like Keenan Allen will play, so Mike Williams will still be that number 2 guy. And so because of that, that's something that you're going to have to consider. If those number 1 receivers on the other receivers that we were talking about, or that he has for options, were out, then we have a discussion. But if Golden Tate plays, you're playing Golden Tate. If not, you're going Demaryius in that situation.
I'm in full agreement there. Let's keep it going with some of your guys' questions as we just passed the bottom of the hour here on Facebook Live, on Periscope, and on YouTube Live. He's Justin Fensterman of SiriusXM Fantasy Sports Radio and Fantasy Alarm. You hear his show every Saturday morning at 6 a.m. East Coast time for Wake Up Fantasy Sports. It's a must-listen-to show. Throw out your coffee because you don't need it on Saturday mornings.
No, your head will explode if you drink coffee while listening to me.
It's so much caffeine, and then the placebo effect just takes in.
Well, that's the thing, and that's why we do this, Ben. It's that we love doing this, and we have passion about it, and that's something that I try to show on my show. Is that we're just like all of you. We're fantasy players. We love the game, and that's what comes out during the radio shows.
So make sure you listen to Fantasy Saturday mornings. Read his outstanding work over at Fantasy Alarm. And also subscribe to the Fantasy Sports Markets podcast as well. We'll put up a link in just a little bit. But the most important thing is that if you guys are new to Fantasy Sports Markets, we are a non-salary daily fantasy site, which means you can play and draft the players that you truly want to draft. I'm putting it back up on the screen. If you go to fantasysportsmarkets.com and use the promo code HOMER, HOMER, that gets you $10 to use on FSM. On us, you can use it in any of our contests. You can spread it out if you want to do it in one of our baseball contests today. The final week or final day of regular season baseball at FSM, that's available for you guys as well. We just finished week 5 of Top 25 college football, where there's a chance every week to win $100,000. So all of this is available for you, but it expires today. So make sure you go to fantasysportsmarkets.com, use the promo code HOMER, HOMER, and that gets you $10 on us. Let's keep going with some of your questions. Again, this is from Sizzle on Periscope. John Brown is in like every question, Fence. You go with John Brown, Nelson Aguilar, or Marvin Jones in a half-point PPR. Brown is in the Sunday night game. Marvin Jones is on the road at Dallas. And I'm blanking out for a second on where the Eagles are this week. Philadelphia is on the road at Tennessee, which has actually been a bit of a surprising defense this year. They've been a little bit more impressive than I've expected. Alshon Jeffrey is back, so I think that slides Aguilar down a little bit.
It does.
But I still think he's the most safe option out of those 3. What do you think?
Man, I wanted to say I would say that he's still the safest, although John Brown is right there. I agree with you, though, Ben. I think Aguilar still, even though you're sliding him down, he's still the safer option here.
An intriguing running back 2 question from YouTube Live coming in. Do you go with Bilal Powell today for the Jets or Aaron Jones in a running back 2? It's a standard league, so that takes out the ability for Bilal Powell to be a really good pass catcher and have an impact here. But there's no real indication that somebody like Aaron Jones is going to take the bulk of the carries at this point, even though he's the best running back on the team.
Right, and that's something that Jamal Williams is still there. Ty Montgomery is still there, and that's a little bit of a problem. Now, here's the question with Randall Cobb being potentially out. Yes, it does bump Allison up a bit, but still with the running back core, do you want to deal with a 3-headed monster or a 2-headed monster? That's the big question, and that's why I think that Bilal Powell is an interesting option, but he is against those Jaguars, Ben. You got to remember that.
That's true, but I think you can run on Jacksonville. It's very difficult to pass on Jacksonville.
Right. Right.
But
I would give the edge to Powell until Jones separates himself a little. I would
too. Let me bring up actually somebody, because I teased this in the video before we came on the air. And again, keep your guys' questions coming. We will make sure we get to all of them this morning. We talked about Sterling Shepard, and he's in an absolute smash spot for the Giants today. The Saints, after Marshawn Lattimore, who's going to be shadowing Odell Beckham Jr. On the road today at MetLife Stadium. And I still would trust Beckham to get a fairly safe floor today.
Yes.
But you saw Calvin Ridley just tear up the number 2 corners and the slot corners for Atlanta last week. or not for Atlanta last week, for the Saints last week. What do you think of Quincy Enunwa today? Because I think for being the most high volume pass catcher for Sam Darnold in a game where they're going to have to get the ball out quickly, in a game where they're going to be playing from behind and still going to have to throw against Jalen Ramsey, I think Enunwa could be in line for as much as 10 to 13 targets easy because he's going to be in the slot, because he's a tough runner, and because I think Darnold's going to have to get the ball out to him, and there's a connection there. And I think a lot of people are going to be on Shepard. If you wanted to pivot here, I think Enunwa might be an even better play.
That's that's a little bit bold, Ben. That's a little bit bold. Okay. I mean, I'm a big Sterling Shepard guy, as is the rest of the world today.
Yeah.
He's
the clear chalk. I think we're in full agreement on that.
He is. Now, if you're trying to be different in tournaments, then yes, maybe Enunwa is a good option because, Robbie Anderson is still there with the Jets. But at the same time, my guess from thinking like a coach, because I always try to get people to think like a coach, teams have taken out Robbie Anderson, and I think Jacksonville's just going to follow suit with that. So Robbie Anderson's still going to be seeing that top coverage. But Quincy Enunwa has been a top 20 targeted wide receiver, a top 20 in all of football. And that says something right there. And even though you just said, Ben, that, yes, it's very hard to throw on Jacksonville, still with Quincy Enunwa, he's almost like at this point a silent assassin when it comes to targets and the passing and points. That's what you're looking at. So, yes, if you want to fade the chalk and not go Shepard, totally fine with that, especially in tournaments. And yes, with the Enunwa's cheap value, you absolutely could go after a top 20 targeted wide receiver.
Yeah, I think he's a great play today. And again, he'll be under the radar considering the matchup. People will look at Jacksonville and they're going to be freaked out because of it. But I think Enunwa was in a really nice spot today. Someone that I'm absolutely. But
I will say this, Ben, and this is from Quincy Enunwa himself. We had him on the show. Quincy Enunwa did say, though, that, hey, look, if he doesn't get targeted, don't treat him like a villain. He doesn't deserve that. He can't control that. He literally said that on yesterday.
That is a self-aware man in the fantasy community. Salute to him.
Yes.
This is from Billion on Periscope. We kind of talked about this initially. We can get back to it. Do you roll the dice with somebody like Josh Gordon today? In daily, maybe you throw him in a lineup or two just to have some exposure. I don't know if I can do it in season long just yet.
Very tough. And again, it depends how depleted your receiving core is. No. And this is a situation where we need to know who your wide receiver 3 is. If you're in 2 starting wide receivers and a flex, you're not starting Josh Gordon at all. If you're in 3 wide receiver starting leagues, then we need to know who else is there, that there is on your team. But right now, Ben, I agree with you. Daily play, you want to put him in a few lineups. The report's just coming out that he knows the playbook, that he's expected to play fine. But outside of that, season long, give it another week.
From Andrew, do you go with Marvin Jones, Calvin Ridley, or Michael Crabtree? So this goes back to whether or not you believe that Ridley is as good as advertised to me. I've always been a Marvin Jones guy, but I think especially in a tougher matchup, he's starting to turn into the third receiver on the Lions team. Now, again, throw the ball a ton. He still gets decent volume. I think Crabtree is actually in the best spot of anybody here. Even
Agreed.
Ridley, and it's going to be tough to fade him with as good of a matchup as Matt Ryan has, and clearly he's looking his way with both targets and red zone targets. But to me, I think against Pittsburgh and the leaky pass secondary, and Flacco's going to throw the ball a bunch today, I think Crabtree's in probably the best spot out of all those guys.
And the Steelers pose very, very little threat on defense, and that's why I'm going with Michael Crabtree there.
Okay. We'll continue to take your guys' questions over on Periscope. Like we said, for whatever reason, we've had a connectivity issue over on Facebook Live, so we will post this video to there once the live stream is done. But we are here on YouTube Live. We are also available on Periscope as well, so continue to get your questions in. Fence, were there any other injury notes or anything new that's been coming out this morning? We talked about Alshon Jeffrey, the fact that he's going to be coming through. Rob Gronkowski is also in play as well. He's expected to play through his injury. Anything else that's intriguing? Oh, Marlon Mack for the Colts is going to be out this week as well.
Yes, so you're looking at, with Marlon Mack being out, that's a very tough timeshare to figure out between Hines and Wilkins. I think Wilkins gets more touches, I think Hines has the better chance for the touchdown. I'm looking for some trends that we've seen. So if you're looking for the higher ceiling and you want a piece of this running game, you're going to go with Nyheim Hines for the higher ceiling. The more conservative approach, I think, is you go Jordan Wilkins.
There was a report coming out from Adam Schefter earlier this morning. You were talking about one of the frustrating receivers that you've had in Larry Fitzgerald. The reports are in Fitzgerald regarding his hamstring. He's expected to play today, but there's also, it's sort of like the Doug Baldwin effect where he's not 100%, and he's still a 35-year-old wide receiver.
Right.
How do you feel about exposure to somebody like Christian Kirk today? I don't know if I would play him on fantasy sports markets. I think without a salary cap, you can get some much better receivers in play. But I think Christian Kirk, considering his target volume last week, I think Rosen is a better quarterback than Bradford, at least particularly for right now for this team. It wouldn't surprise me at all if Rosen looks in the direction of Christian Kirk quite a bit today.
No, and we haven't really seen anything from Chad Williams at all. So if you're looking at it from that standpoint, yes, Larry Fitzgerald, he plays exclusively out of the slot. So that also benefits Christian Kirk there, too, if we see him on the field a little bit more. Absolutely. So that gives Christian Kirk a little bit more breathing room. But outside of that, we haven't really seen much from the other receiving options. I'm looking up right now to see Ricky Seals-Jones. He doesn't have the best matchup, but he's been getting targeted a little bit overall this year. Not encouraging from the 3 targets last week. So, yes, Ben, Christian Kirk, that is someone who's an intriguing play today that I'd go.
And he did find himself in the end zone as well. Got a tight end question on Periscope from Go Pokes BF. Do you go with George Kittle or Will Dissly today? Just a little bit of perspective. George Kittle lost his starting quarterback, a guy that I thought could make George Kittle potentially a top 5 PPR tight end throughout the season. Now, CJ Beathard is somebody that's also very familiar. If you listen to our buddy Adam Levitan on the Daily Fantasy Edge podcast, you talk about the shower narrative. They were teammates at the University of Iowa. They showered together. They know each other quite well. But Will Dissly has another good matchup against Arizona, and he has gotten the opportunities in the red zone. Kittle, to this point, has not. He's also dropped a couple touchdowns as well. I'm going George Kittle because I truly expect the volume to be there more consistently than Dissly.
And I liked Dissly after the first week. I did, but they also have another tight end there in Vanette who they just keep going to. And it's frustrating because I had Dissly in a few of my DFS lineups in previous weeks, and he didn't do anything because of the 2 tight ends there. Again, by the way, I don't think that if you compare it very quickly to Philly, where Zach Ertz is just targeted a ton and that's it, and prioritized. So, yeah, Dallas Goedert may score a touchdown, but Ertz is going to get his. It's not like that in Seattle, and that's why I'm going to have to go with George Kittle.
Another one coming in from PD Dubs on the subject of tight ends. He says, where would you rank Eric Ebron in a full-point PPR league? I think Ebron is still a top 5 play this week. If you're looking at specific to the Sunday slate, because Travis Kelce is in the Monday night game. But if I'm looking at tight ends that I love this week, Gronk is still that number 1. Zach Ertz probably number 2. I think Jared Cook against Cleveland, they like to blitz a ton. I think Cleveland blitzes the most of anybody. Usually that leaves the middle of the field open, and Cleveland just got exposed last year against stopping the tight end. They're a little bit better this year, but I think Jared Cook is in a good spot to score today. And then Eric Ebron, I know he disappointed a lot of people. He was the chalk savings tight end on the salary sites last week, Fensty, but he still got 11 targets. And Luck is not throwing the ball deep. And against Houston, who you can exploit through the air, I think Eric Ebron is in a good bounce-back spot, especially when he let a lot of people down last week.
No, he is, and with no Jack Doyle as well. That we were just talking about.
And that's the only reason that I'd consider playing him without Jack Doyle.
Now, if we're talking non-salary, Ben, and this is another tough play because he's got a great matchup, do you go with him over Jimmy Graham?
I think I would. Because
it's a tough call. It is, and I see why he's getting targeted. And with Graham, you never know. We know the history with Aaron Rodgers with tight ends. So if you want to be safe there, you can go Ebron. But still, with Jimmy Graham having a very intriguing matchup, that's really the one name outside of maybe. I mean, I'm looking down the list here to see matchups, and he's really the only guy that's there. Maybe Austin Hooper if we want any more exposure in that Atlanta game. But Ebron, with the amount of targets he's been getting, he's healthy. I'm fine with that.
I think Ebron is the safer play, although I think about last week, remember we both talked about Kyle Rudolph as a good play. And again, that game let a lot of people down, especially if you were owners of the Minnesota Vikings defense. By the Vikings defense right now, I don't even know how to describe how awful that. I went against my own rule, Fensty, when it comes to drafting defenses and kickers for Minnesota because I thought they were going to be an elite level play. Now in auctions, maybe I spent $2 instead of $1 and got them early, but I reached into the 13th round out of a 15-round draft to take Minnesota because I thought they were going to be as elite as they come all year, and they haven't been.
What, Ben, first of all, never do that again.
Yeah, thanks.
Never do that again. No paying for Jacksonville's defense. No paying for Justin Tucker. No paying up for defenses or kickers. You shouldn't even be playing your fantasy leagues with defense or kickers. You should just have 2 extra flexes. But if you don't,
that's beside the point.
Did you see in our auction that the Jaguars defense was going for about $5 or $6? That will never, ever be me. I will play the matchups, and I will add and drop another defense every single week if I have to.
I know. Listen, I'm not saying that you're wrong. I'm saying I was wrong. I'm saying I felt that they were worth spending the $2 in an auction as opposed to the $1, or moving on the 13th round when you have a late 13th round pick to go up and get them. I was wrong.
You're allowed, and that's fine, but I feel bad for you. I feel bad for you, Ben, because you're better than that.
I know.
And that's, you look at these matchups every week, and to all of you out there, this is why you shouldn't be prioritizing defense and kickers. It changes every single week. It's so based off the matchup, and without any kind of move max, you should be rotating your kickers and defenses.
All right, for what it's worth, Cleveland has actually been better than I've anticipated against the tight end position this year. I still think that will change. I think eventually you'll be able to score on them, so I still like Cook. But Buffalo, I believe, is rated 23rd. Against tight end. So maybe this is a good smash spot for somebody like Jimmy Graham. I think he's a perfectly fine tournament play. Couple questions coming in from Justin over on Periscope. At the quarterback spot, I guess these would, I would imagine, Fensty, that these are all daily related questions because nobody has all these guys on their team. At the quarterback spot, do you go with Tom Brady, Pat Mahomes, or Drew Brees? Let's look at it from a fantasy sports markets perspective. Let's say you put salary aside, because I think all of them on the salary sites are expensive anyway. I think it's hard to go away from what Mahomes and Brees are doing. Now, I still love Brady today. I also said I loved him last week, but I think a lot of people did, and they got that wrong. I probably would lean towards Brees even over Mahomes. And that's tough to say because of how good he's been, but I just think Brees is not going to let you down in any sort of situation, even on the road.
Right. And I know everybody is really focused on that, the dome versus non-dome arenas. And that's where I'm feeling that still, even though Mahomes, what we've seen has been great, I'm still thinking that Drew Brees gets the edge.
Yeah, it's another full Alvin Kamara day with Mark Ingram finishing up his suspension. Michael Thomas has turned himself into arguably the best fantasy receiver in football this year. There's just a lot of options for Brees, and he doesn't mind throwing the ball short. His completion percentage is great. I don't believe he's thrown an interception this year. And the Giants' defense doesn't scare me. I think you can move the ball on them quite well, which is why I think because of the fact that New Orleans has so many concerns on their defense, that Brees is going to have to throw the ball consistently throughout the game as well. What about between Zach Ertz or Eric Ebron today? I still think because of the monster consistency for Ertz, you go with him, even though Ebron's in a terrific spot.
Yeah, no, Ertz is also in a great matchup against Tennessee, and that's something that you can't forget about. So because of that, I'm still thinking Zach Ertz gets the edge there, despite the fact that Ebron might get double-digit targets. You go with Zach Ertz. You view Zach Ertz like a receiving option. And even with Alshon Jeffrey in there might be a little bit less pressure on Zach Ertz. You got to think of it from that standpoint as well. So with that, I'm still going with Zach Ertz.
And then one final toss-up at the wide receiver spot from Justin. Do you go with T.Y. Hilton or Calvin Ridley today?
So I was actually asked this question on Wake Up Fantasy Sports yesterday.
Oh, interesting.
So it's a lot of people are making this decision. I'm still going T.Y. Hilton here. I know that Ridley's that shiny new toy, but Hilton, with luck, we're thinking that he's going to be throwing a lot, especially with no Marlon Mack, still figuring things out with that run game, so he's going to have to rely on his receivers and Eric Ebron with no Jack Doyle. So because of that, I'm still going T.Y. Hilton in this matchup.
I'm with you there. I think Hilton, especially, even with the target volume not being where he'd like it to be, it's not even the target volume, but the deep target volume. The big question about Andrew Luck coming in this week, and he had to even address it with reporters, is can he make all the throws right now? Scouting would indicate, Fensty, that he can't. He says he can. They are at home. It is an intriguing matchup for them against Houston. And T.Y. Hilton has always been a much better player inside Lucas Oil Stadium than outside of Lucas Oil. So I think he's in a good bounce back spot. I think the problem with Ridley is that you're right. There's sort of all these expectations on him right now. And the reality is he's a good wide receiver. But at some point, things are going to shift back to the norm in Atlanta. And I think T.Y. Hilton is a guy that I probably prefer purely based on volume and opportunity.
Yeah, and that's what you said, Ben, and that's that less opportunity for Calvin Ridley. Now, Calvin Ridley took advantage of a great matchup, and I think that he is a solid receiver. And in my deep bench leagues, I did take Calvin Ridley just to stash there for a while. But still, with T.Y. Hilton, he is that top guy there, and he's still going to get a lot of targets, and that's why I'm still playing it conservative there.
What about somebody like Dallas Goedert? This is also coming in from Justin. He says, does it hurt somebody like Zach Ertz with the past couple weeks? I don't think so, because I think he was more of a product of Alshon Jeffrey not playing.
Right.
They wanted to use a little bit more two wide tight end sets. They wanted to have another vertical wide receiver just to help out Carson Wentz. And so it showed to be very effective. I think they view Zach Ertz as somebody that is constantly on the field. His snap count is really not going to change. Goddard's almost very similar to Ertz, but I don't think it necessarily hurts him either. I just think it benefits the team overall.
Right, and this has been what the Eagles were going to be doing from the start, and that's running a lot of two tight end sets. That's why I believe it was that I don't know if they traded up or they just completely stole Goddard from the Cowboys in the draft, but right. I forget about that. But still, the reason that they got him was to have that two tight end sets that they want to run, and so I don't think that Goddard's going to impede on Ertz at all. But if we're going to be going with Goddard in a tournament, I can't trust that. We were just talking about Will Dissly. It's almost the same thing there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're spot on. Any other games or matchups? We'll start going through some of our favorite plays today on Fantasy Sports Markets. For those of you that are looking to make a lineup in any of our contests today, we'll go through those in just a couple minutes. We've obviously gone through New Orleans and the Giants. That's a game that we're going to want exposure to. Cincinnati and Atlanta is in there as well. Let me get your thoughts really quickly on Tampa Bay at Chicago, where Ryan Fitzpatrick, 3 weeks in a row, has thrown for 400 yards. There were reports, Fensty, that after a really bad first half from Fitzpatrick, when he went from Fitzmagic to Fitztragic, that they were going to consider benching him for the second half, which is crazy considering Jameis Winston wasn't available to play. He's going to start today against the Bears on the road. Do you have any feeling that Ryan Fitzpatrick can continue to have another solid game where he lights it up?
You're going to see what Ryan Fitzpatrick does. He's going to have his games. He's going to throw for a lot of yards. But then he's going to have his 3 to 5 interception games, and that's just what you're going to get. He loves to throw. But let me bring this into the conversation.
Yeah.
Just saw this come out about 20 minutes ago, that apparently Ronald Jones will be active because we've seen how much Peyton Barber has been struggling in this run game. So it makes me wonder, with Ronald Jones now, being the reports are he's expected to be active, if maybe they rely on their run game a little bit more.
It would make sense, and here's the thing about Peyton Barber, and I said this a couple weeks ago because I felt that the volume was still there. Didn't happen in the game against Pittsburgh at home, but I still think Peyton Barber's not going anywhere, even if he's not a threat in the running game, because of how valuable he is in pass protection. Ryan Fitzpatrick in the game where he was wearing Deshaun Jackson's clothes, and that was the ultimate sort of Fitzmagic type of post-game style at the end, he credited Peyton Barber for a couple huge pass protection blocks that allowed him to go downfield, find Deshaun Jackson, find Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, O.J. Howard. I mean, there's so many passing options that he can go to in Tampa that they know that that's such an integral part of their game. So I don't think he's going anywhere, but as far as trying to get some more volume on the ground, whatever Peyton Barber's been doing the last couple of weeks has not been effective.
No, not at all. And then when looking at this game and seeing the reports that you just talked about, Ben, about how it was said that he was apparently going to be benched, he, I think, is going to be on a bit of a short leash, and against a very aggressive Bears defense. Let's say he throws 3 picks in the first half. You might be seeing Jameis come out in the second half and starting. If they're down 21-0 or by 20 plus points at the end of the half.
As far as, okay, so we've gone through pretty much all the different matchups. Let's end on this note with the Monday night game. Do you see any concern that this is the week that Mahomes starts to slow down? Denver is at home. The line has gone from 55 down to 54.5. So it's still, I asked the Action Network to look this up for me. It's still the highest over-under that's ever happened in a night game in Denver since back in 2013 when you have Phillip Rivers against Peyton Manning. I tend to forget about how good those Broncos offenses were because we think about how good their defense is. To me, I thought, oh, Mile High is already a tough place to play. I was surprised to see such a high over-under in a night game there because of that defense. Do you look at it this week and say, I am on Mahomes each and every week because he hasn't shown me any signs of slowing down? Or do you look at it from this perspective and say, Denver's pass rush, Kansas City does have some of their flaws. Maybe I want to avoid Mahomes this week.
He's been hitting so many receivers. If he was just going to Tyreek Hill, and that's one thing. Then he's obviously taking advantage every week of the opposition corners. But he's hitting every receiver, Ben. And that says something right there, that he's able to spread the ball around as easily as he has been. So at this point, how we have to look at it is until he has one of those really bad games, we have to keep rolling with him.
Right, I think so too. Even though you know he's going to be chalk, even though you know everyone's going to be on him, I have a hard time doing that as well. He's still a projected number 1, number 2 quarterback this week. And especially if you believe that Kansas City's defense is as atrocious as they appear to be, he has to throw. He has to go downfield, and he has a lot of weapons to be able to do it. All right, we'll get one final question before we go through some of our favorite plays on fantasy sports markets for today. From Brandon on YouTube streaming, wants to know, for a flex PPR, do I go with Aaron Jones, Christian Kirk with Larry Fitzgerald dealing with his injury, or Dion Lewis in the flex?
I think the safest play is Dion Lewis still. I mean, with Derrick Henry, he's been banged up. And, yeah, with Mariota, and they're all, the Titans are very, very banged up, and Corey Davis hasn't done anything. So with that, I think Dion Lewis is still going to be active in that passing game.
Probably the safer play. I think I like Christian Kirk just a tad more. Seattle's defense is exploitable. You can pass on them. And I think Kirk showed the ability to get open last week, and a guy that Josh Rosen, I think, is going to look to quite a bit. I would go Kirk. Fensy would go Lewis. Regardless, I think both of them are perfectly in play. All right, Fensy, you ready to go through some of our favorite plays for fantasy sports markets for today?
Yes.
All right, so let's start at the quarterback spot. Remember, fantasy sports markets, non-salary. You can draft the players that you want to draft. You don't have to worry about trying to fit guys in. I think especially if you're looking from the Thursday through Monday slate, Mahomes, we just talked about him being in play. But somebody between, like, say, Drew Brees and Tom Brady, are you still going in the direction of Drew Brees today?
I am. Okay. I am going.
I am too. So I'd probably go Mahomes, Brees. Another safe play is going to be Aaron Rodgers against Buffalo. I don't expect Buffalo to have the same type of performance as they did last week.
Right. That's also a good option. I mean, we talked about it all day. I mean, Matt Ryan as well. I mean, non-salary, you may want to stay away, but Matt Ryan's still in a very, very good spot. Don't forget about that.
Do you think people are looking at Phillip Rivers at all? Because I feel like that's another guy that's in a great spot that could be very low owned today.
Yeah, he's against one of the worst defenses in the league. So, yes, I do think a lot of people, and now that Keenan Allen's looking like he's going to play, I like it even more.
Let's go to the running back spot. I think Kamara, with his opportunity, even on the road, still being the guy that's going to get a ton of the snaps with no Mark Ingram taking touchdowns away. He's kind of your free space today. But if you're trying to fill in the other running back spot, who are a couple of guys that you have interest in today?
Ezekiel Elliott versus those Lions. I'm really looking forward to that matchup. Did have a fumble previous game, but still that's not going to stop Zeke. And also remember that with the Cowboys, receivers are all banged up. So Michael Gallup has not done anything. So it seems like Zeke's only competition for anything is Tavon Austin at this point. Yeah. So you're going with Zeke. Jordan Howard, Ben, in a very good spot as well against Tampa Bay. So I like him too. And you can't forget about Melvin Gordon. We just talked about the Chargers, and Melvin Gordon has been doing a lot of great things in that passing game as well. So you can't forget about those guys there.
I'm with you there. I think Saquon Barkley, based on the amount of volume that he gets in the passing game and what we expect to be a shootout with the Saints and the Giants, is certainly in play. James Conner is always in play based on the volume, but Baltimore is pretty stout against the run, so I'm probably fading him.
What about Theo Bernard, Ben?
Love him today. Love him today. And I think the nice part is that even though he will be chalk on the salary sites, I don't believe he'll be the chalk play on fantasy sports markets. So I will absolutely have a lineup including Gio Bernard today, especially because fantasy sports markets is full point PPR as well.
Oh, that's perfect then.
Wide receiver. Again, if you're looking at the Thursday through Monday slate, you have to consider Antonio Brown. Purely based on the volume. Although Juju Smith-Schuster has gotten plenty of volume, plenty of targets. I think he's gone for 100 yards, if not in all 3 games, certainly in 2 of the 3 games. And then Michael Thomas, if you believe the Saints are going to throw the ball a ton, he's probably the top projected wide receiver this week. But there's no real free space. So I think you can mix and match a little bit.
Yes, and also don't forget, we know we talked a lot about Tyler Boyd, and that's because everybody's on him, but don't forget about A.J. Green too, Ben. You were talking about how we still can't forget that Julio's there. What about A.J. Green? I know he got hurt last week, but he's healthy, and when he's healthy, he's out there, no limitations, in a great matchup. I can't deny that.
If you're intrigued by a tournament play at fantasy sports markets, because everyone's going to likely be on Breeze or Mahomes, man, throw in a Matt Ryan, Julio stack, throw in an Andy Dalton, A.J. Green, Tyler Boyd, Tyler Eifert. Do a whole game stack, I think, today, right, because I think that's a game that is going to get everybody involved. So I'm right there with you. You rolling the dice on somebody like Tyreek Hill this week on the road at Denver?
I am. I do like Odell Beckham Jr.'s matchup a bit better. Also, as I will roll with Tyreek Hill, though, over Keenan Allen. That I will do.
Yeah, and I also think if you want a really sneaky 3-man stack today, Baker Mayfield, Jarvis Landry, David Njoku.
Yep, Njoku, we'll see, but definitely Baker and Landry. Landry's going to get double-digit targets today.
I have Callaway in a couple lineups today, too, because I think you can exploit Oakland deep as well. And Callaway has had a couple, especially his target volume consistently going up. Is something big as well. Big Mike points out that the Tampa Bay second-round pick is active today. Ronald Jones, we talked about it earlier in the broadcast. I don't think Peyton's going away anytime soon, like we mentioned, but Ronald Jones, I wouldn't start him just yet. If he's sitting in your waiver wire, though, go ahead and pick him up if you want to stash him for a little bit later. And then finally, Fensty, tight end. I think it comes down to Gronk and Kelsey being the 2 best plays of the week. Zach Ertz is always in play as well. And then it's sort of that question that we had earlier, the toss-up between somebody like Jimmy Graham and Eric Ebron, where we know that Ebron's probably the safer play, but Jimmy Graham with a good matchup against Buffalo has a chance to go off.
Yep, and that's the thing. And again, with Buffalo, we saw what they did last week, but still, with Green Bay, with Aaron Rodgers, it's we've been watching his knee; it's fine. So you're going to be looking at a Jimmy Graham today against one of the worst defenses against tight ends. I like that play for today.
There you go. That is Week 4's edition of FSM Football Sunday. We were with you for a little more than an hour today answering your lineup questions. Make sure you guys come back and join us every Sunday morning, 10 a.m. East Coast time, 9 a.m. Central time. We're here for you. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast, the Fantasy Sports Markets podcast. We'll have that posted in audio form there as well. Fensty, where can the people find you before we say goodbye?
Always on SiriusXM Fantasy Sports Radio, at Fensty Sports on Twitter. And for all those basketball fans out there, get ready because you're going to be seeing a lot more of me.
Yeah, and the basketball coverage, if you think his football coverage is good, his basketball coverage is second to none. We'll go through, he's a frequent guest with us on the Fantasy Sports Markets podcast during basketball season as well. And remember, I put it back up on the screen, promo code Homer at Fantasy Sports Markets gets you $10 on us. It expires today, so make sure you guys get in on the action as well. For Fensty, this is Ben. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you for being a part of our live show. Always appreciate your time, and good luck in week number 4 of the National Football League.
Good luck, everyone.